Welcome back to another episode of 5 a.m. Theology. Rose, this week in our reading, we find ourselves in some more Psalms, and these Psalms are called Songs of Ascent. Now, the Songs of Ascent were songs that Israel would have sung as they went towards Jerusalem and up the mountain on their way to the different allotted feasts and festivals. And as we read through them, they just seem extremely relevant to our lives even today.
Yeah, and you wouldn't think that considering they're on their way to festivals and things like that, but you're right, they are. Because they're songs for a traveling pilgrim, and that's where it becomes so applicable to us. Some songs are praise songs. Some talk about the sovereignty of God. Some are prayers. Some talk about the great things the Lord has done to help us remember him. And these are all kinds of songs of ascent. They all fall into that category. And the whole purpose, again, is to remind ourselves what we believe about God and what we can cling to.
Yeah, and for that very reason, when people say, oh, go to the Psalms if you're hurting, these are good ones to start with.
I agree.
I was reading this week and I was struck by Psalm 130. And what stuck out to me the most was the last stanza of it, which says, Israel, put your hope in the Lord, for with the Lord is unfailing love, and with him is full redemption. He himself will redeem Israel from all their sins. So after having read through Hosea not too long before this and thinking how the Lord keeps talking about Israel relying on all these other countries for their rescue and not relying on the Lord, that line really, really stuck out to me. If we think back to Israel's sin, how many times do we see them? They take a census of their troops just so they know how powerful their military is, and they're going to rely on those numbers instead of relying on the Lord. And they rely on kings from other countries to bail them out of trouble, and they end up on under tribute and everything else. And they do that time and time again when some other country is knocking on their doorstep. Instead of calling on the Lord, they kept relying on the strength of man and man's provision for him. And that is so applicable to us today.
Yeah, I keep thinking about the origins of the northern nation of Israel, where God told Jeroboam, I'm going to make you king of the northern nation, 10 tribes. Be faithful to me and you will do well as king. And the first thing he does is set up an idol in Dan.
Yeah.
Instead of relying on the God who just spoke to him and told him he's making him king, and that happens, and it will go well with him if he's faithful to him. We shake our head at that, but how many times, you're right, Chris, over and over again, God's people, us, rely on something other than God for our rescue. And we all do it. We try to rely on what we do. We try to be what will please God and maybe earn brownie points with him, rather than relying and trusting in our salvation and just being obedient to his word. And we forget about what he's already provided us. But it's applicable in more than just salvation. It reminds me of something that we did in a No Trash, Just Truth episode where we talked about George Mueller. And he totally put his faith and trust in the Lord for his daily needs. I mean, literally his daily needs. And I don't use the word literally. But he didn't even tell men what he needed. He would just pray for his daily needs, the food they needed to get through that day. And he trusted that God would meet them, and God always provided.
Yeah, he was a real inspiration to me. And I guess what I want to say this morning is that as we walk through our pilgrim walk as exiles here on earth, waiting for that day when we'll all be with the Lord, as we go up what seems like mountain after mountain after mountain sometimes, we can and we should cry out to the Lord to meet our needs. And he will be faithful. He was always faithful to Israel, even when they were unfaithful to him.
That's right. And sometimes people get caught up. We talk about in No Trash, Just Truth, a book that Alistair Begg wrote called Pray Big, which is making the scope of your prayers bigger than just your own personal needs. But one doesn't negate the other. Yes, we need to pray for eternal things, but it doesn't negate that we need to go to God with our daily needs. And sometimes it seems as if God keeps us in a place where we can't do anything about our situation ourselves, and he just keeps giving us mountains after mountain or afflictions because he wants us to rely on him. He wants us to go to him. He wants us to cry out to him. Part of Israel's problem and part of our problem is that when God does supply our needs, we're likely to neglect him or forget him. Hosea 13:6, you talked about, we just got through Hosea. Well, Hosea 13:6 says, when I fed them, they were satisfied. When they were satisfied, they became proud. Then they forgot me. And that's a big ouch.
It is, because that's exactly what we see over and over again in the Bible. God takes care of his people's needs. He provides abundantly for them. He's wonderful to them. And then when they grow fat, they forsake him. And it's a good lesson for us to keep in mind, because it was a constant problem for God's people in the Old Testament times. And it can be a problem for us if we're not careful and if we're not watching for it.
Well, coincidentally, not, Chris, when you said you wanted to talk about this passage, it just so happens, talk about God's timing, that my daily Spurgeon devotional was on this very thing. So I just want to read a little bit. This is Charles Spurgeon's word. The limitless fullness of his all-sufficiency is as free to the believer as the air he breathes. Christ has put the cup of his love and grace to the believer's lip and invites him to drink of it forever. If he could empty it, he's welcome to do so. But as he cannot exhaust it, he's invited to drink abundantly, for it's all his own. What truer proof of fellowship can heaven on earth provide? When I stand before the throne, dressed in beauty not my own, when I see thee as thou art, love thee with unsinning heart, then, Lord, I shall fully know, not till then, how much I owe.
I love that. And I love the word pictures in that.
Mm-hmm.
That's a good thing to ponder. And that's a great place to end today. Have a blessed morning, everybody.